G'day coppers, welcome back to the bush. In this episode of Lockyards for All Driving, we're going to compare the 12 volt versus the 24 volt Travel Buddy ovens and how to run them off your 12 volt system. We'll even throw a step up into the equation, preheat performance, cooking performance, and even show you how to increase the output by nearly 100% whilst saving battery capacity. So stick around for that at the end of the video. Righto, for those who don't know how a step up works, let's have a look at that. I've always been a strong proponent of learning things from first principles. Not only the how, but the why as well. So why, when we feed that extra voltage into that Travel Buddy, be it the 12 volt or the 24 volt models, do we get that extra performance? Well, it's this thing called Ohm's law. And that's it over here. So we've got voltage, resistance, and I for amperage. Now your Travel Buddy has a heating element inside of it. And it's of a fixed resistance, so we can't change R. That's fixed. So when we're putting 12 volts into the unit and we divide that by the resistance, we get a resultant amount of current. Now in this case, we're putting 12 volts in and we're chewing down about 9 amps. So voltage divided by our amperage will give us our resistance. And we can see it there, it's about 1 1/3 ohms. But what happens if we up the voltage? Well, we'll get to that in a second. Also to take into consideration is the wattage output of the heating element. And all that is the voltage times by the current. And in this case, it's 108 or thereabouts watts. What about the step up though? Now we're changing that 12 volts to 15 volts of potential difference between our positive and negative that's feeding our Travel Buddy. And because of the increased voltage going into our Travel Buddy divided by our fixed resistance, our amperage actually goes up. So in this case, it goes up from about 9 amps, an extra couple of amps, to 11.3 amps. Now if we go our voltage times by our amperage to get our wattage, well, we've gone up from 108 to about 180 watts. So that's an increase of 67%. If you wonder why step ups work, well, there you go. Now the 24 volt model being fed 24 volt from a battery source chews down about 6.7 amps. Using Ohm's law, we can derive the amount of resistance in that heating element, and it's about 3.6 ohms. We can also use the power equation to work out how much wattage it's outputting of that element, and it's about 160 watts, so slightly less than the 12 volt model being fed 15 volts, but it's still 48.3% above what the 12 volt model does on 12 volts. Substantial increase in anyone's book. But let's have a look at what happens when we bump up the voltage. Now let's check out the 24 volt Travel Buddy being powered by the step up with a 28 volt output, and that in turn being powered by a standard 12 volt system in your four-wheel drive. We already know the resistance value of the heating element inside the 24 volt model. So using Ohm's law up here, again, we can work out how much current it's going to draw. And we're up 1 amp from 6.7 to 7.7 amps, but we're also up 4 volts. Let's work out how much wattage that is. That's nearly 216 watts. And that, my friends, is a 98.9% improvement over the 12 volt model being fed 12 volts. It's almost double. Now, as you can see here, I've got the Bluetti power station and it's plugged directly into my multimeter and it's outputting about 13.5 volts. So let's get the 15 volt step up, plug it in and check out the difference. Now with about 13.5 volts coming out of that Bluetti, heading into the step up, we're getting about 15.2 volts out. But we've got a bit of an ace up our sleeve. And for the 24 volt Travel Buddy, here's a 28 volt output from 12 volts. So you can run 12 volts from your vehicle into this and get 28 volts out to run a 24 volt Travel Buddy. Will that work? We'll see in a minute. What I've done is I've dragged out the good old temperature data logger. I've tried the 12 volt Travel Buddy on 12 volt and 15 volts, and then the 24 volt Travel Buddy on not only 24 volts, but 28 volts and even 30 volts. So let's check out the preheat performance. On the left hand side here, we've got the temperature in degrees Celsius ranging from 0 right through to about 250. And on the bottom here, time in minutes going through to about 2 hours. Now our target preheat temperature will be 180 degrees Celsius, so that's what we'll be aiming for. First up, 12 volts into that 12 volt oven. Well, we didn't actually reach 180 degrees Celsius after our 2 hour time period. 172 to 173 I think it got to, so close, but as they say in the classics, no cigar. Now we know if we put a 15-volt step up especially, onto that 12-volt oven, we'll get a substantial increase in performance. So nothing new there. We went down from not actually getting there within that 2-hour time period down to preheating in 39 minutes. And we actually reached hysteresis here. So it's turning off and turning back on as the oven thermostatically controls that temperature. What about 24 volts into that 24-volt oven? Are we going to be doing substantially better than 15 volts into that 12-volt oven? Let's check it out. Well, not too much in it, to be honest. The gradient is very similar, and it was 39 minutes for the 15 volts into the 12-volt oven on that step up there to 42 minutes running 24 volts into that 24-volt oven. Nothing really to write home about. What about if we increase the voltage up to 28 volts? So we're overdriving it like we did with the 15-volt step up. Well, there we go. We substantially increase the gradient here. So we're getting an increase in performance, and you can see the hysteresis here where it's turning off and turning back on as the thermostat is controlling the temperature. And we went from 39 minutes right down to 27 minutes preheat. We have substantially, again, increased the performance, even over a 15-volt step up going into a 12-volt unit. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's increase the voltage a little more. Let's bump it up another couple of volts, up to 30 volts. What are we going to do there? Well, we went from 27 minutes down to 24 minutes. So, yes, we did get a little increase in performance. The gradient is very similar. So what that tells me is we're starting to reach a point of what's called diminishing returns. We're not getting the extra benefit we saw with a 4-volt voltage increase from 24 to 28 versus 28 to 30. Even though that's only half, you can see the gradient increase here is substantial, and the gradient between the 28 and the 30 volts here is pretty minor. So the 24-volt unit with at least 28 volts in it seems to kick the 15-volt into the 12-volt units, but comprehensively. But as they say in the classics, the proof is in the pudding. Now, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anyone who's actually used a 12-volt Travel Buddy on 12 volts that the performance is pretty average, okay? In excess of 2 hours to reach that 180 degrees Celsius. But the 15-volt step up goes a long way towards fixing that. Around about 40 minutes preheat to that 180 degrees Celsius. But what about that 28 volts into the 24-volt Travel Buddy? We're down under half an hour. Yes, ladies and gents, using step-ups, we've gone from in excess of 2 hours to less than half an hour using the 24-volt Travel Buddy, whilst running it off a 12-volt system. We've reduced the preheat times by 3/4, and that's not bad in anyone's book. So if you're after a step up, there's actually links down in the description. Full disclosure, they're affiliate links, so whilst it won't cost you any more to purchase through those links, the channel does get a kickback and it helps us continue to create content like this. But how does that relate to actually cooking pies? So I've dragged out my old staple, the 4 and 20 frozen pie test into a preheated oven. Let's check out the results. I don't know about you, but when I'm out four-wheel driving, it's all about the pies. The faster I can get one of 4 and 20's finest into my pie hole, the better. So let's check out the options. Now, the internet tells me the optimum temperature, internal temperature that is, for a 4 and 20 meat pie is 74 degrees Celsius. Now, all these pies were put into a preheated oven at 180 degrees from frozen. Okay, as you can see, the 12-volt model at 12 volts took 120 minutes or 2 hours. The 15 volts via the step up into the 12-volt models had a substantial saving of time down to 81 minutes. We're saving nearly 40 minutes there. Can we do any better? The 24-volt model took only 68 minutes. Let's bump up that voltage to 28 volts, and there we go. We're less than an hour now in that preheat oven from dead frozen to 74 degrees Celsius, 59 minutes. And 30 volts, it was about the same. Again, we're starting to reach the point of diminishing returns. There's 3 minutes in there, nothing to it. So whilst the reduction in cooking times weren't as impressive as the reduction in preheat times, we still managed to slice that time in half, going from about 2 hours using 12 volts into that 12-volt Travel Buddy down to less than an hour with those extra volts being thrown into that 24-volt Travel Buddy. But I can hear, what about battery capacity? And here's where I deliver on the earlier part of the video. These things aren't 100% efficient, these step-ups. Now, they quote in the ads about 92 to 94% efficiency. Well, I measured it, and I got 77% efficiency. So not great, but still not too bad. So that means for every 100 watts of energy I put into it, I got 77 watts out. And the rest, well, these heat up a little bit, so they're wasted to heat. That energy, that 33 watts is wasted to heat. So as you can well guess, we've done the numbers. Let's check out the results. Now, unless you've got 400 odd amp hours of lithium iron phosphate in the back of your four-wheel drive, battery capacity usage of your Travel Buddy is going to be of interest to you. Now, on the left-hand side here, this is battery usage in watt hours as opposed to using amp hours, which we're all used to, because that takes into consideration voltage as well. 12 volt being fed into the 12 volt system. This is your preheat. This is cooking your pies, 433 watt hours. This is a 15 volt step up, taking into consideration the inefficiency of the step up, runs at about 77 to 80%. 147, so less there, but 306 on the actual heating cycle with 453. We're pretty line ball so far, not too much in it. The 24 volt system, however, saves a substantial amount of battery capacity usage running off a 24 volt battery. We're down to 293 watt hours. What about feeding 28 volts from your 12 volt system, taking into consideration the inefficiency losses through that step up converter? Well, we're up again, 398, but less than the two options using the 12 volt system. And finally, the 30 volt, again, something similar, 428 versus 398, not too much in it there. Now, 30 volt step ups are reasonably hard to find. I really had trouble searching for one of those, but the 28 volts, they're all over the shop. So there you go. You're using substantially less power than the two 12 volt unit options, and you're getting substantial increase in performance while using less battery capacity. Now, I've always maintained the truth is actually in the data. It's not an opinion, it's in the data when it comes to reviews. And we've saved 8% of our battery capacity using the 24 volt Travel Buddy and the 28 volt step up, even taking into consideration these things don't run at 100% efficiency. Now, if you've already got yourself a 12 volt Travel Buddy, by all means, grab your 15 volt step up. It's going to drastically reduce your cooking times and your preheat times, and it's actually going to save your battery capacity as well. But if you're in the market for a Travel Buddy and you don't already have one, or you're struggling to find things to spend money on, it's not even a contest. Get yourself a 24 volt Travel Buddy. Get yourself a 28 volt step up. Happy days. Righto guys, now if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, by all means, give it a thumbs down. Not once, not thrice, but twice. Thanks guys, we'll see you in the next one. So if you've enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell icon. It's really important to us and you won't miss out on our future content. Now if you want to support the channel, by all means, consider becoming a patron on Patreon, and you get things like early access to our videos on YouTube. Either way, we hope to see you out on the tracks.